What's going on, guys? My name is Ryan Snelling, and you are listening or watching me on the Watch Diary podcast or the Rewatch Ryan YouTube channel. Whatever your preference, I'm excited to sit down with you today and talk everything Thor Love and Thunder, everything Taika Waititi. It's going to be a nice, big episode. And as you can see, my trusty Trenta cold brew is almost empty. It's because I've already been recording with Brando. That was the first person I got to see this morning, is Brando's beautiful face. We talked about The Boys Season 3, full spoilers, big discussion. That's on the YouTube channel right now, so definitely check that out if you are a fan of The Boys, as we are, because we just gushed for 45 minutes over that show and over that season. So definitely check that out. I woke up late this morning. Don't know how I feel about it. I've been going to bed a lot later than usual. I went to bed at like 2 a.m. and normally I go to bed at like midnight. So I woke up at about 10 o'clock. I don't have a whole lot of time to do this episode, I'm not gonna lie. And I keep messing up. I don't know why. I've done multiple takes of this. I was just talking about Thor Love and Thunder, and I stopped it because I wasn't happy with my review. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to begin with, but now I'm like backing myself into a corner here with this podcast. But that's okay. I think you all like it when I get straight to the point. So I'm going to plug some videos and then we'll get right into the Thor Love and Thunder review. But yeah, if you are a fan of The Boys, check out that video. I guess I'll put up the audio here soon, so you can listen to it on the podcast feed. But also another thing that I did this week is find my top 10 movies of 2022 so far. My top 10 is out there. It's live. It's available for you. But technically, I got there by ranking every new release, which I don't remember how many it was. Probably like 22 or something like that. I ranked every new release of the year so far and found my top 10 out of that. So definitely check that out. It's on the YouTube channel. Just find the every movie ever. But I also did the quarterly report for April through June. If you don't know what the quarterly report is, I did another one. It was one of my very first videos after rebranding to Rewatch Ryan. I just rank every movie of the quarter. So the first video, of course, that came out a few months ago was January through March. This one was April through June. And I think I watched like 20 more movies in that quarter. If I remember correctly, the first video had 44 movies and this one had 64. So it was a big undertaking. And I leaked confidence on the video. I don't know how I feel about a couple of my choices, particularly with where I put E.T., but I do have a chance to correct it, because the next assignment, the next big thing I'm doing, is ranking every movie that I've watched this year. Yeah, that's right. It's a mid-year ranking of everything that I've watched, so it should be about 108 movies. And that's coming out next week. And I'm going to couple that with the Gray Man review, because the Gray Man comes out on Netflix. It's not a big theatrical week next weekend. So there's going to be 3 big every movie evers celebrating this mid-year pivotal turning point. So there's that. Look for all that stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel or follow the podcast feed wherever you listen to podcasts so you get all those rankings. Today, we're going to review Thor Love and Thunder, a non-spoiler portion. We're going to rank Thor movies. We're going to rank Taika Waititi movies. And then we're going to have a spoiler discussion at the very end of this podcast, where spoilers are a go for Thor Love and Thunder. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, you're still fine. I'm going to be disciplined talking about it. Another thing that I'm doing, and if you're watching me, it might be, I don't know what it looks like while I'm talking. If you're watching me, I'm trying so hard not to say as many ums and uhs. I almost did it. I listened back on the last podcast that I did, and there's just ums and uhs. I don't typically have a problem with it. A public speaker, one of the best public speakers, one of the best comedians ever, has a big problem saying uhs and ums, and that is Conan O'Brien. I don't know if you've ever noticed this or not, but he has to say and all the time when speaking. And it's one of those things where, like, if you point it out to me or I point it out to somebody, they hear it and they get it, but at the same time, it doesn't bother people. Because here's the thing, and I learned this very early on. When I started podcasting, I was obsessed with editing out quiet moments, ums and uhs. I was obsessed with it. And once I started podcasting with Jay, I just slowly got over it. And I realized that if you just listen to something the way, and it's just how people talk, people don't really think anything of it. So I'm sure a lot of you haven't thought anything of the fact that I do ums and uhs all the time. But it bothered me so much that I decided I'm just going to try to do it less while I'm talking. I don't think there's anything really wrong with that. But I don't know what it looks like. I don't know if you can see me thinking about it, but I'm trying so hard not to say ums and uhs. I'm also trying not to look at myself in general. I do that a lot. But the quality of the videos that I've been uploading on YouTube have really been bothering me lately. And I do, when I render it out in Premiere, I do change the quality a little bit. So like if I post an 1.5 hour watch diary, it's going to have lower quality than the 8-minute movie review portion. Because there's no reason to wait so long for that to upload to YouTube. Especially when not a lot of people watch the full Watch Diary episode anyway. It's like, I'll just put it out in a lower quality and it doesn't take as long to upload. But the shorter videos have the higher quality because they still don't take a whole lot to upload them. So I do change the quality a little bit, but even when I don't, there's not supposed to be any quality loss. So right now when I'm looking at myself, you can't see what it looks like, but I look good. But when I go to look at the video after the fact, when it's done rendering, it doesn't look as good. And it bothers me. I've done everything I can settings-wise that I know to do anyway. So maybe what's next is for me to just get another camera. I mean, I don't know what else to do. The light is pouring in. I have all kinds of lighting in here. And I think it just came down to the webcam probably. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I might update that and fix that so that there's just higher quality. But either way, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, my trusty Trenta cold brew is gone a little bit. But it's all good. I pushed the boys. I pushed the Every Movie Ever stuff. And we're going to talk about The Gray Man next week. I think that's it, really. I think we can get right into Thor. And we're just going to kind of move this along. And I did post an early out of the theater reaction on the YouTube channel and on TikTok, all that good stuff. So at the time that I'm recording this, Thor Love and Thunder is a 68% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I can't remember if it was Fandom or IGN. One of those sites posted an infographic of all the Rotten Tomatoes scores of the MCU. And 68% is definitely lower tier. Now, I don't think it deserves to be lower tier Marvel. But at the same time, I do get this rating. And I also get why the audience rating is higher. There's just a lot to say about this movie. I remember when it premiered a couple of weeks ago, and the first early reactions came out. They were just gushing and glowing. And I felt really good about it. I was confident that I would have a better experience with this movie than I did with Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And I still ultimately think that, but not by as much as I thought originally. So the things that people were gushing about and glowing about is that they were like, oh, this movie justifies coming back with Thor for the 4th time. Taika Waititi coming back. He captured the lightning in a bottle a second time. It's, I don't know. It's Ragnarok recaptured, but even better. A lot of people just love this movie coming out of it. And that's, if I remember correctly, it's not really how it was with Multiverse of Madness. Like, a lot of people were blown away by Multiverse of Madness. I think the Sam Raimi of it and the horror of it shocked people. But also, a lot of the reviews were like, we know that not everybody's going to vibe with this. So it tempered expectations, I think, in a healthy way. And I didn't have a particularly fond viewing experience of that movie. I don't think that that's what happened when this premiered. I think I was a lot more confident with this movie, and it felt like everybody else was too. But then as we got closer and closer and the reviews started coming out, I saw, people went the other way too. So I tempered my expectations yet again. I was still confident this was going to be the better movie and I was going to enjoy it. But I knew that not everybody was vibing with this movie trying to be too funny. So when I saw that, it reminded me of how I felt about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And a lot of you have probably heard me speak on this already, especially if you've seen my Marvel Ranked videos. I overall love the sense of humor that the MCU has. Of course, you can criticize that sometimes every character has the exact same humor. Sometimes it's the kind of humor that I call, he's right behind me, isn't he? Type of humor. That is so easy that every TV show on Earth has, every movie on Earth has. It's so played, he's right behind me, isn't he? Type of humor. That makes everybody laugh, I guess. Taika Waititi is not like that, though. He's a very singular voice in the MCU that I still appreciate to this day. And I think he's very important to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I also think he's an amazing filmmaker. I think he got in his way a little bit with this movie. Now, I found this movie to be very funny, but I also did find moments where I wish it wasn't funny. So it wasn't quite as bad as Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 for me. I've seen other people kind of categorize this movie into halves, and that the first half was just trying to be too funny and the second half was much better. I don't know if I'm in that camp either, because I think the second half of the movie has things that I don't really respond to either. It's definitely less funny. I understand that, but it has other issues that didn't make it like obviously more enjoyable than the first half. So it's weird to be like, I was consistently laughing, but at the same time, I wasn't vibing with the movie as a whole. And it's unfortunate. I think a week ago, Kevin Feige put out like a press release. It was between the premiere and 2 weeks ago and this coming out, being released, where Kevin Feige was like, oh, in the coming days or coming weeks, we're going to talk a little bit more about Phase 4. I think it's been obvious where we're going, but I don't think everybody else does. So he said that, and I'm like, okay, Thor Love and Thunder is going to give us some direction, some insight as to where Phase 4 is. It doesn't. In fact, I'm shocked at how standalone this movie is. Of course, it's a sequel. Of course, it brings back Natalie Portman. So I guess in that way, it's not necessarily standalone because it does continue some threads that the other movies do. What I mean by it being so standalone is that it's not a multiverse movie in any way. There aren't any moments where they just like bring Shang-Chi in. You know, there's no cameos from any other movies or TV shows. It's very much just another Thor installment. And it doesn't really give you any insight as to where Phase 4 is going. Now, does it have to? No. But at the same time, it does add to this narrative where we don't really know what we're doing. So while it is one of the better, more enjoyable movies, I'm still trying to navigate where we are with the greater story. Now, that's not what makes or breaks a movie. I appreciate every movie as its own installment, as you should. I don't think it's always about what comes next. But if my overall feeling is like a lackluster Phase 4, this kind of continues that. And I don't agree with it being Ragnarok Part 2 or anything like that. I don't think lightning struck twice with this movie. So I'm thoroughly entertained by this movie. I think the second act, particularly when we go to a certain place and meet a certain character, I do find it a little meddling. I kind of felt that way about Doctor Strange too. The second act didn't really excite me that much, but how we bring Jane back into the fold, I really, really appreciate. And I don't think it's a spoiler because there's nothing about it that hints that way. I'll just go on and say that this is the first Thor movie without Loki. And so I think what they did with Jane and the Mighty Thor, I really, really liked it. And I thought that it worked. There were a lot of heartfelt moments. There were a lot of comedic moments. And I thought Natalie Portman did a great job as Mighty Thor. I do kind of wish she had a little bit more to do, actually. But it's not the worst feeling to, have the movie keep me wanting more. But what they did and how they brought her into the story, I think it ultimately worked, and I really, really liked seeing her. I also like seeing Valkyrie. I like seeing Korg. What surprised me, and it's also fine, it surprised me how little the Guardians of the Galaxy are in this movie. I think a big criticism is that people are just going to have a problem with it not being like a fulfilled promise. The way that we ended Endgame with Thor running off with the Guardians, and like how exciting it was to see him go up against Star-Lord and go toe to toe, and all those comedic moments at the end of Endgame, I don't think it really fulfilled that promise. It was sort of just this natural, like, the thing about Taika Waititi, and he has this in most of his movies, he always has sort of like an introductory montage where we catch up or we learn about this character every one of his movies does that for the most part. And the Guardians are kind of just a part of that. They're not really in the narrative whatsoever, and I was kind of surprised because I thought we were going to see a lot of Guardians, but throughout the movie. And so it didn't happen, and that's okay. But I think that fulfilled promise of like the Asgardians of the Galaxy, I think it's gonna let some people down for sure. But they're barely in it, just to kind of, make sure that you set your expectations, manage your expectations. But everything with exploring like new Asgard on Earth, I thought it was very funny. I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a lot funny moments and nice callbacks to what we got in Ragnarok that were nice. But yes, the first half of this movie, it is always trying to be funny. If we're not exploring and if we're not catching up with Jane, it is always trying to be funny. And it does get a little exhausting, even though there's certainly that's what's mixed about it. Is it kept me laughing, but also there were times where it would fall flat and I'm like, this is too much. And that's why I do call this movie entertaining, because the imagery, especially, it's a gorgeous looking movie. It really, really is. I am excited to watch it at home in a way that I'm not excited to watch Shang-Chi at home, for example, because I think Shang-Chi looks awful at parts. But this movie's gorgeous. If I remember correctly, it's the first movie where they utilize the volume that brings Star Wars to life on Disney Plus. I think for the most part it worked. There were only a couple of shots that I didn't think were finished, but and that's been just part of our journey here with the MCU, is that there's just so many shots and so many things that looked unfinished when they push it out, and it drives me nuts. But this didn't really have that. Maybe a couple of like Korg shots, but ultimately I thought the movie looked really, really good. Gore the God Butcher. He is a fun villain to watch. He's not in the movie enough. So it kind of just felt like he's in the upper echelon of mid-level Marvel villains, and they got Christian Bale to do it. So if there was like any less of Gore, like literally, like if there was a way to measure it, okay, there's actually going to be a notch less of Gore, I don't think Christian Bale would have gone for it, because it would have been too much of a mid villain. And I hate how much I'm using the word mid. But it was like almost just enough to get Christian Bale in on it, because I felt like it was enough to give him something to chew off of, but not enough to like make him hate his life, because he doesn't really seem attracted to this kind of thing typically. So they got a really good actor to play. I mean, it's kind of ranked up there with like Jake Gyllenhaal and Mysterio. Like, I loved Mysterio, but not a lot of people do. And it's kind of like that. In fact, Mysterio does more. Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio is better, in my opinion, than Christian Bale's Gore. And that just says how much screen time and how much he affects the plot. There should have been more of that. But when he was on screen, there was really nice, scary imagery. But it still just mostly follows Thor and Jane, and there's a lot going on there. There's not a whole lot of cutaways to Gore and what he's doing, and it's unfortunate, because I really feel like more Gore would have helped to balance the tone a little bit, but because we were always just making light of Thor and Korg, and it was just relentless. So I do get the people that love this movie, because it's like a freak fest, and I understand, and that's why I'm not being too hard on it. But I'm just underwhelmed because of where we are in this whole thing. So it's a nice movie that I feel like I could just put on and watch, but only because I already know that it's not going to, change much of how I feel about the MCU. I I'm going to talk more about it when I rank the Thor movies, but it's just, it's fine. It was a better theatrical experience. A lot of people laughed in the theater. I didn't hate my life the way that I hated it. And it had a lot to do with, like, the people. It wasn't the movie itself that made the Multiverse of Madness such a terrible experience. It was the people in the theater, the crowd. I saw this as early as possible. It was a 6 p.m. showing. And I feel like that definitely helped as well. But yeah, I'm going to have more spoiler discussion at the end. But that's just where I'm at. I don't know how this contributes to the overall story. I just know that it was a fine Thor movie with great Jane stuff, some fine Thor stuff, and yeah, that's kind of it. So I don't know where it's upper mid level Marvel for me. I think if I was going to rank Phase 4, which I'm not going to do here, but if I was going to rank Phase 4, I would probably put it as like second or third best Phase 4 movie. If Spider-Man No Way Home is the best, it's maybe second or third best. But that doesn't also say much because of where we are. So let me know what you think of Thor Love and Thunder down below. Don't spoil it. And if you're watching the standalone cutout portion of this video, don't spoil it in the comment section. Wait for the spoiler discussion. But that's my big takeaway, which is kind of just all over the place. Let's rank all Thor 4 movies. Let's rank all 4 Thor movies. Welcome to every movie ever. So, with Thor Love and Thunder out of the way, I do feel pretty confident about this ranking. But I'm going to talk you through it, of course. Follow along with all of my lists on letterboxd.com/rewatchryan. I'm not going to do a full MCU ranking again until the very end of the year. So that's why I'm just going to be talking about the 4 Thor movies here. And on a separate video, I'm going to rank Taika Waititi's movies too, because I watched all those in preparation of this. But with that said, let's rank the Thor movies. Number 4, the worst Thor movie is hands down Thor the Dark World. I feel like that is maybe one of the worst MCU movies ever, and it might be unanimously one of the most like common opinions. There's not a lot of like Thor the Dark World heads. You know, over time, things like WandaVision, they contribute to the Age of Ultron hype, I guess, and that was like a movie that easily the worst Avengers movie, but I think people have grown to appreciate it because of other entries in the MCU. They give it further context or whatever. Thor the Dark World was given that extra context when they explored its story in Avengers Endgame, but not even Avengers Endgame can make Thor the Dark World better as a movie. The moment, maybe, but not as a movie. So I feel like I have to spend no time on this because I feel like you already agree with that sentiment. I just think Thor the Dark World is one of the worst MCU movies, so without a doubt, it's what caused Ragnarok. Like, maybe it's not as hyperbolic as Batman and Robin, but it was like the movie where it's like, oh, we need to take this a completely different direction because this just doesn't work. Thor the Dark World is obviously a better movie than Batman and Robin. But, I mean, it caused the tide to turn and gave us Ragnarok. So, Thor the Dark World is easily the worst. The next movie on this list, I just don't think it's the greatest whole. And while it does have wildly entertaining moments, it is funny, it is heartfelt in times, I just don't think it's a great whole. The third best Thor movie is Thor Love and Thunder. Again, I talked about it in my review. It did make me laugh a lot, but it also made me think, oh, this is trying to be too funny. And I wish that we got more of Jane. I wish that we got more of Gore. And I realized that there's only so much time. And I just think the tone and the script wasn't nearly as tight as it could have been. Jane is great, and I love their storyline, but is it as strong as Thor and Loki? When you look at all the Thor movies, what's that common denominator? What makes every Thor movie truly great? And I think it's a lot of it, his dynamic is with Loki and his own family. and this explores Thor's relationship to Jane, of course, but also like New Asgard and the Guardians. And it didn't really fulfill the Asgardians of the Galaxy promise that Endgame set up too. So we have a great Thor and Jane pickup, but ultimately it's not the greatest whole, and it's not the best version of Thor. And it is very close to quality of the second entry. The second entry, obviously, is the original Thor. This movie, I think I like more than a lot of people. I actually think that it deserves... I think Captain America, the First Avenger, is the movie that gets the most attention of, like, sneakily being, like, a really great Phase 1 movie that's overshadowed by Iron Man and the Avengers. But I think Thor is, like, really good. Say what you will about like the end fight scene with the Destroyer, and maybe like Jane isn't the most fleshed out character, but Thor has a lot of funny moments. I remember like audibly laughing out loud when one of the funniest moments to me for the longest time in the MCU was when he walks into the pet store and just shouts, "I need a horse." That was hysterical. When he throws the mug on the floor and breaks it, drinking coffee, that kind of stuff, that fish out of water stuff, really, really worked. And Asgard and everything looks really good. I remember thinking that like a Superman movie should look like the Kenneth Branagh Thor movie. So it does take me back to a more simpler time when we were building up to other things. There was that Thor and Loki dynamic that I really appreciate, and I just think it's a greater whole. But the quality of Thor and Thor Love and Thunder, they're very, very close. I wouldn't be surprised if I looked at somebody else's list and they just had those flipped, because maybe over time your Thor has been the Taika Waititi Thor, and I understand that, but I think that there are strengths and weaknesses to what everybody has done with the character of Thor, and so I just think that first Thor movie, without Love and Thunder, it still would have been my number 2, of course. There's only so many movies in this franchise, but I have no problem putting the original Thor as my number 2 film, which leaves Thor Ragnarok. This movie is thoroughly entertaining. One of my favorite shots in the entire MCU is in this movie, very early on, when he's flying away from the dragon, and it's that wide shot of him flying from the dragon, and the dragon's catching up to him. It's one of my favorite shots in the entire MCU, because it's bonkers, but it also looks really good. That movie is wonderful. I love Hela. I love Scourge. The second act, it's not as fun as I remember it being. I've seen Ragnarok so many times, but everything that happens on like Sakaar, outside of the Hulk battle, it's a little lacking. I'm not gonna lie. I get a little bored with when him and Banner are just kind of running around. There are parts that don't entirely hit with me, but the ending is fantastic and a lot of fun. Ultimately, it's one of the best MCU movies without a doubt. So everything that's been said about Ragnarok has been said already, but it goes Thor the Dark World, Thor Love and Thunder, Thor, and Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok, it's hard to beat that. Unfortunately, Love and Thunder didn't get there, but that's my ranking of Thor movies. Guys, if you're watching the standalone video, I'm sure you can find the Taika Waititi ranked movies. You already know Ragnarok is better than Love and Thunder, in my opinion. Go check out that video and see where I rank the rest of his filmography. It was a lot of fun to revisit, because I love and respect Taika Waititi as a filmmaker so much. Alright guys, welcome to Every Movie Ever here on the Rewatch Ryan YouTube channel. I am going to rank every single Taika Waititi movie now that Thor Love and Thunder is out and in theaters. There are 7 feature-length Taika Waititi movies, and just like Thor Ragnarok, it inspired me to go back and watch some of these movies that I hadn't seen before. When Thor Ragnarok was coming out, I watched What We Do in the Shadows for the very first time. I think that's a never before seen on this channel somewhere. I think that's up, but I have a reaction to that from years ago. Thor Love and Thunder made me watch 3 of these 7 movies for the very first time. I hadn't seen Boy, Eagle vs. Shark, or Hunt for the Wilder People, but now I'm super educated on Taika Waititi, and I'm excited to do this. I think over the past few years, especially, Taika Waititi is very much a blockbuster filmmaker. You know, he's employed by Marvel. It's easy to like think of him as just a Marvel director, but he's so much more than that, and he's such a welcomed voice in Hollywood. Hollywood is better having included Taika Waititi in the conversation, because it's so deserving, and he's such a singular voice, and he's just so talented. And we all know what makes Taika Waititi great is his sense of humor, his writing, his ability to go big while also go small, be super funny and super heartfelt at the same time. He's just an ideal filmmaker for me, and I just love everything about him as a person too. He's just so much fun to he's fun to be a fan of, if that makes sense. So without further ado, let's rank the 7 Taika Waititi movies. You probably already saw my Thor ranked. You know that I think Ragnarok is better than Love and Thunder. So there might be a controversial choice though inside of this list, but I'll talk it out as we go. I think there's just upper echelon Taika Waititi when he's firing on all cylinders, and then there are movies on the bottom tier where it's like you can see where he's getting started, but he's not entirely on top of his game yet. So anyway, without further ado, let's go with the number 7 film that I watched for the very first time the other day. It's the movie that I feel like I've heard the least about anytime Taika Waititi's filmography has come up over the years. It's a movie called Eagle vs. Shark. I had no idea what this movie was about when I watched it. I knew that Jermaine Clement was in it, and that's all I had, really. So the synopsis real quick, in case you haven't heard of it. There's a lady named Lily who works at a fast food restaurant, and she starts falling in love with a customer that comes in. And it gets to a point where he wants to invite another of her coworkers to a party, but she steals the invitation and shows up at this costume party, and that's where their romance ensues. And she gets the guy, if you will, but you learn more about what he's going through as a character. It's a short movie. It's sweet in parts, but I also just find it to be the most boring and unlikable because I don't really like any of the characters. It wasn't just something I could go along with. I felt like it was more of an assignment to watch for the... It's not like bad by any means. I just wasn't into it in the way that I'm into all of his other movies. So it was very easy for me to put it on the bottom of the list. This movie came out in 2007. It's very Napoleon Dynamite-esque. I don't know if that's an influence. I mean, that came out in 2004. So it's not like I'm unfamiliar with this territory and this humor, but I just don't think it's Taika Waititi yet, if that makes sense. Instrumental to who he was going to become, for sure. His partnerships with a lot of these actors continue to this day. Totally get it. It's also very Kevin Smith-esque, but I just don't think it quite reaches above any of the other movies that I would compare it to. So Eagle vs. Shark, it's worth watching for sure. It's short and breezy. It's 87 minutes, but ultimately it's just the movie that I care the least about with Taika Waititi. So Eagle vs. Shark, I rented it on Vudu. The next movie it's just the next step up, naturally. It's where you see Taika Waititi becoming Taika Waititi, and I think it's a much more enjoyable, a lot funnier of a movie. It's called Boy, and this is a simple, sweet story about a kid who starts hanging out with his estranged father. He's been technically orphaned in a way because his mother's passed and his dad ran away, and so he's kind of just been hanging out in this house. I don't know what's going on in New Zealand, but apparently kids are just left to their own devices, and it's kind of sad in a way that he's in a house with a whole bunch of kids. He's looked after by his aunt, I believe, but she's gone from the house a lot of the time, and so it's just him and his friends, and he starts hanging out with his dad, who's played by Taika Waititi. And so having him included in the movie, unlike Eagle vs. Shark, it definitely helps too, but it's a sweet story. You start to see the Taika Waititi-isms. You know, the thing that Taika does so much, I don't know how many times I'm going to say the word Taika, but I can't stop it. The thing he does so much in all of his movies are these introductory montages. He definitely loves that as the device in getting his movies going. So you learn about this kid, this boy, and you learn that he's obsessed with Michael Jackson. It's 1984, so he loves Michael Jackson, and that's another thing that Taika loves to implement is music. And being a fan of music, or it's being like having songs and artists being so crucial to his stories, that's definitely a Waititi-ism. So that starts here too. So it's just a very sweet story. It's very funny, but it's also so small, and he isn't the Taika that I've come to love and appreciate over time quite yet. And I think that's what makes this next placement controversial, because Boy is arguably a better whole, But Thor Love and Thunder is number 5. And I do find Love and Thunder to be very watchable and very entertaining and funny at parts, and you're watching a Marvel story. It's just not a great whole, and it's not like it captured what Ragnarok did again. So it's on the bottom tier. I understand if somebody would put Boy above Love and Thunder, I get it. But if I'm going to choose between which movie to watch or which movie to rewatch, I think it's just going to be Thor Love and Thunder. And it might just be the Marvel bias. It might be the recency bias. But it's not really supposed to take away what Boy is, because Boy is so good. But Thor Love and Thunder, I'm just going to inch right above Boy in terms of watchability. Though they're very similar in quality. And yeah, so I did that full review. I did that full review on the channel, and I've already ranked the Thor movies, so I don't really have much else to say about Thor Love and Thunder, but it's my number 5. So my number 4 movie is, I think, the title that is most, except for Thor Ragnarok, outside of Marvel, outside of his blockbuster filmmaking, his Disney filmmaking, I feel like What We Do in the Shadows is the most synonymous to Taika Waititi. And I've always sort of felt that way. Ever since I watched it for the very first time and Hunt for the Wilder People had already come out. Like, What We Do in the Shadows over time has become a big franchise. I mean, it's on its 4th season, the TV show on FX. It started out as a short film. So it's just a super recognizable franchise at this point. And it's also extremely funny. I love the take of vampires in an office mockumentary type film. I just think it's so clever and so funny. The only reason why it's number 4, and the reason why there's 3 movies above it, is because when you watch What We Do in the Shadows, it's not as narratively rich as the other 3 movies. When you watch it, you can still tell, oh, this definitely was a short film, and maybe it could have stayed as a short film and we would have been fine, because it's just so much about, let's just see everything we can do with making vampires funny. Let's throw out every single thing that we can do to make light of vampires existing in our present world. Now, without seeing a single episode of What We Do in the Shadows on FX, now that I've seen the movie, I could see how it would benefit from having just more smaller vignette type episodes, and then over time building another story. It's almost like the movie, watching the movie's fun and enjoyable, but you can see how it doesn't necessarily, the medium, serve what it actually is, which is just a joke machine. So why I love this movie and I think it's fantastic. I think maybe there are better versions of it, because when I watch it, I think, oh, this could have been a short film or a TV show. So I think What We Do in the Shadows could be greater in its other mediums, but it's still very synonymous with Taika Waititi. And I think anything that Taika's actually in, for the most part, is better. He's his own secret weapon, and What We Do in the Shadows, moving on. He's not his own secret weapon in Thor Love and Thunder. In fact, he might get in his way with that movie. But all these other movies show that. So number 3 is a movie that I heard a lot about but knew the least about, and I watched for the very first time a couple weeks ago. It's Hunt for the Wilder People. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I think it elevates a lot of what he did in Boy and in What We Do in the Shadows. I heard a lot about this movie starting with when Deadpool 2 came out. Julian Dennison is the name of the young actor who plays the boy, and I knew that he was in Deadpool 2 because of the work that he did with this movie. Sam Neill. I didn't know what this movie was about. The title, I just assumed that these 2 guys maybe heard a legend about some people that lived in a forest, and they were going to go hunting for these people because they needed to, whatever. That's not really what it is. And they are the Wilder People, and it's about New Zealand's hunt for these 2 people. I was very surprised to learn that. It's thoroughly funny, very heartfelt, and just really, really well made. And I wish more movies were like this, because it feels so big while also being so small. It's such a unique film, and I just think it's all of his other smaller stuff. This is the most elevated, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. In fact, I think I remember a couple of weeks ago, Letterboxd retweeted something that it was like somebody had watched this movie every day for a year, and that was very compelling to know going into this. I don't know if I could do that, but it is a really fun movie, and I was most surprised by it upon rewatch, or first watch rather. So Hunt for the Wilder People is my number 3 favorite Taika Waititi film. My number 2 favorite is Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok is probably the most discussed Taika Waititi film of all time. If you looked on Letterboxd, there was a way to measure, search, and he changed Thor and the MCU both for the better. I mean, one of the biggest quality jumps from sequel to sequel is Dark World to Ragnarok. It just elevated Chris Hemsworth, it elevated the MCU in every single way. And Thor Love and Thunder kind of proves that it's kind of hard to replicate that magic. Thor Love and Thunder pulled a lot of what was right about Ragnarok, but still didn't succeed. And Ragnarok is top 5, I think, Marvel movies. If I remember my list correctly, it's very high up there. It has one of my favorite shots of all time, which is very early on the film when the dragon beast is chasing him. It's a wide shot. I love that shot so much. It's way funnier. It's a greater whole, got a great ending, great villain. The second act is a little middling. I was kind of surprised at how little I was interested in a lot of the stuff going on in Sakaar, outside of the gladiator fight, of course. But Taika Waititi coming in, it was a match made in heaven. And so, yeah, there's not a whole lot more to add to the Ragnarok conversation because it's been talked about to death. But Ragnarok is the second best Taika Waititi movie. Number 1, it's not a Marvel movie. It's Jojo Rabbit. Jojo Rabbit is one of my favorite movies of the past decade. I think it's incredible what he's able to do. And what I love about Jojo Rabbit, I think it starts as a drama first that has funny moments. And it has the introductory montage, and it has the whimsical nature of Sam Rockwell and Taika Waititi playing Hitler. All that stuff is incredible. It's his Oscar-winning film. I just think everything about Jojo Rabbit is incredible. It's his best child star. It's his best cast, his best script, his best story. The emotional beats are heart-wrenching. The funny moments are hilarious. I think it is the best blend of everything Taika Waititi can do while also being the most mature of all of his films. And I just love Jojo Rabbit, and I think it's the one that when we talk about Taika Waititi movies, I think it might be a little undervalued because of the Marvel stuff and because of like Wilder People or What We Do in the Shadows. And, it's not like Jojo Rabbit's a franchise in the making, but I think it is easily the best of everything he's able to do. And he's going to go down as one of the greatest filmmakers if he continues to balance his place the way that he does in Jojo Rabbit. And I just think it's an incredible, incredible film. And I rewatch it all the time. It was in my top 3 of 2018 or 2019, whatever year it came out. It was in my top 3, I believe. And it hasn't aged today. I love it so much. Jojo Rabbit is the best Taika Waititi film. So again, Eagle versus Shark, Boy, Thor Love and Thunder. Where's my list? What We Do in the Shadows, Hunt for the Wilder People, Thor Ragnarok, and Jojo Rabbit. Guys, that's my Taika Waititi ranking. Thank you for joining me. Go check out my Thor movies ranked. I kind of already spoiled it a little bit, but it's up there in the channel. All right, so let's do a brief spoiler discussion on Thor Love and Thunder, and then we'll wrap up here on Watch Diary. So the thing that I want to talk about, mostly the post-credit scenes, but also the death of Jane. Now, Jane and her storyline, it was a great replacement, if you will, for the Thor and Loki dynamic, which we've come to know as being one of the best dynamics in the entire MCU. Loki is such a beloved character, and you really, really needed something to sort of supplement that. And I think everything that they did with Jane and Mighty Thor, for the most part, worked. I really enjoyed it. I want more from her, honestly. But ultimately, what we have here is such a standalone movie that is so, it wraps up Thor things, but it doesn't add to the greater MCU conversation, which it doesn't need to. But this is the biggest problem that I have, is that Kevin Feige the other day said that we were going to find out soon where this was all going. And I feel like this is the least involved with the multiverse and Phase 4. It's its own thing, and I appreciate it. But the post-credit scenes are still nothing. They don't get me excited about anything because everything is so new and aimless. And I say this after every movie, but I really mean it. The post-credit scenes are literally nothing in every Marvel movie. They do nothing more than ever, getting us excited and anticipated about things that we should be excited about. So the fact that in the middle of Thor Love and Thunder, we supposedly kill Zeus and right away bring Zeus back to life, which we're not even really attached to that. So it kind of doesn't mean anything, but it's also just an example of, oh, we just can't kill people. I feel like Phase 4 was supposed to be about gods. In a way, I mean, we're probably going to do some god stuff in Wakanda Forever. We did some god stuff in Moon Knight. But Hercules showing up, honestly, it just, because it teased seemingly a Thor 5, it kind of makes me scratch my head. Because I don't know if we need a Thor 5. And technically, I don't know if Hercules is going to be in Thor 5. It could be something else. But the fact that that seems to set up another Thor movie, it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Because the answer to Phase 4 shouldn't be relying on the older legacy characters. Like, Doctor Strange could have taken us in another direction. They chose not to with Thor, and that's fine. But we have to figure out how to move on. That's the only way that Marvel is going to succeed. So part of what brings Phase 4 down is we haven't succeeded in moving on. Black Widow was a movie that came out too late. Thor Love and Thunder are so standalone that it already adds to this narrative where we don't really know where we're going. And it promised a Thor 5, which I don't know if that's in our best interest, especially when Love and Thunder seems to disappoint a lot of people. So it's just this mixed bag. And then the second one is Jane making it to Valhalla, and it's kind of just like, okay. It was already heartfelt when we saw Jane die, so it doesn't really add anything. So instead of taking that opportunity to build something else, you know, I still like, I have a hard time remembering what some of the other post-credit scenes are that actually do lead to things. Was it Shang-Chi at the end of Shang-Chi where he meets Captain Marvel and Hulk and they're talking about some thing? There's stuff in the Eternals post-credit scenes that tease something that I've already forgotten. Like, there's just too much. And Thor doesn't help that in any way. There's no way that Thor helps add to the narrative that we know what we're doing or where we're going in Phase 4. So when you look at Thor as a standalone movie, I do think there's a lot of great Jane stuff, and they tie that all together. I liked seeing Valkyrie back. I don't think it did much of anything with the gods. In fact, that was kind of the most boring part of the movie, I think, was him and everything that happened with Zeus. I mean, I just didn't care about any of that. There should have been more gore spliced in between. Yeah, I think that would have helped to balance the tone a little bit too, if you had more gore and less Zeus, because Zeus didn't come off as godly. And I guess that was the point, is that we're subverting the expectation of what makes a god and who Zeus could be in this universe. But it was kind of too goofy, and I was distracted by his accent, which, you know, I guess they're just doing a Greek accent, which is fine. But he's Greek god or Roman god? Can't remember. But regardless, just a confusing choice all around. And I don't know how I feel about it. So it's best not to just think too much at what this movie does and doesn't contribute. And also Jane dying. I thought was definitely more heartfelt than the choice to have Thor raise Gore's daughter. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I'm kind of waiting to see how other people respond to that. I like that it was played by Chris Hemsworth's daughter for sure. But like the fact that that was Love and Thunder, I'm not really tied to that emotionally. So I guess we'll see where that goes. But it was kind of like a puzzling choice to me. And it kind of took away from Gore's scariness. That he was redeemed. Because he wasn't a character that needed to be redeemed, per se. Because I don't think we cared enough about him to begin with. So they made a choice, and that's fine. But the fact that like I'm supposed to care that he gives his daughter to Thor, I just don't know how I feel about that. It didn't really add anything to the story or to the character. So that's something I'm going to have to spend more time with. So again, I'm just kind of puzzled by a lot of the choices that this movie doesn't really add a whole lot. The movie's just really entertaining. If you strip away everything that I just talked about, strip away what it means to the universe, how does it measure up to all these other movies, strip it away, it's an entertaining movie, and it's a beautiful movie to watch. But it feels too inconsequential to matter almost to the overall story. So it's top tier. Phase 4, like I said, probably second or third best Phase 4. But that doesn't say much. So I guess that's all I really have for spoilers. I just had to ask those questions. All right, we're going to wrap it up here then. Guys, again, remember, I covered The Boys. It's its own video on the YouTube channel. And next week, we're going to be reviewing The Gray Man. And I'm going to rank every movie that I watched from January to June. That's going to be exciting. See how it all stacks up. If you're watching the individual videos, let me know what your rankings are. I know my boy Justin Williams is going to tell me what he thinks of everything. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Letterboxd at Rewatch Ryan. I appreciate your support very much. I will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.